So welcome to the Bootstrap section of the Complete Web Developer course. In this video, we'll just talk about what Bootstrap is and why you'll want to use it. So Bootstrap, as you can see at getbootstrap.com, is an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework. So essentially, it's a collection of CSS and JavaScript files which enable you to create great-looking, responsive websites. Responsive meaning they look completely different depending on the size of the user's screen. That's really important for web developers at the moment because the use of mobile is increasing very rapidly, but desktop certainly isn't going away anytime soon. So feel free to go to getbootstrap.com and have a bit more of a read if you want to see more about what it does, but really the features will make a lot more sense as we work through them in this chapter. There's a huge number of websites that are built with Bootstrap, over 7 million of them in fact, and if you go to expo.getbootstrap.com, then you'll see a few of the hand-picked examples, and I'll just show you some of them really quickly. So Creative Tim, one here, really nice looking site, all done with Bootstrap. Indicius, again, great looking site, built with Bootstrap. Spotify The Drop, 2015 in review. I think that looks great. Tracked.tv, beautiful looking site. And finally, JDC Design Studio. So this is a portfolio and CV site, which you might be considering making something similar yourself. So in short, Bootstrap makes producing great-looking responsive websites really easy. Comes with a bunch of CSS and JavaScript components that you can use to make websites your users will love. I hope that's enough to convince you that Bootstrap's worth looking into, but it's not the only game in town. And I'll just quickly show you 8 Bootstrap alternatives. And if you Google Bootstrap alternatives, you'll get a bunch of options. There's Foundation, Zimit, Ink, HTML Kickstart. Kickstrap is actually based on Bootstrap, Pure, and HTML5 Boilerplate, and YUI. So all of those great frameworks and well worth investigating if you've got slightly different needs, but Bootstrap, in my opinion, is definitely the best one to start with. So hopefully I've whetted your appetite. In the next video, we'll see how to get started with Bootstrap. So now that you know how awesome Bootstrap is, let's see how we get started with it. A quick note first about Bootstrap versions though. As you can see from getbootstrap.com on my computer, version 3 is currently the latest version, but Bootstrap 4 is on its way. Although they're very similar in many ways, Bootstrap 4 has got a lot of cool stuff and is a completely rewritten version of Bootstrap 3, so I'm going to be focusing on Bootstrap 4 in this course. So that means if you're watching these videos and when you go to getbootstrap.com it says version 3, then you should have a quick Google for Bootstrap 4 and then click on the top result. So as I'm recording these videos, Bootstrap 4 is at the alpha stage, so I'm going to be using this website, but you might be using a different one if version 4 is in beta, for example, or if you go to getbootstrap.com and it says currently version 4, then you can just use that version. Either way, I'd recommend starting off by clicking the big Download Bootstrap button. And then on my page, I'm going to click Introduction and then scroll down and we'll see a nice starter template there. If you're working on getbootstrap.com, then it's a slightly different navigation. You click the download button and then you scroll down until you see the basic template. So same thing, but a slightly different way of getting there. Either way, select the basic template. So just Command C or Control C, and then back over to brackets, and I'm going to replace everything in my jQuery.html file, and then I'm going to go File, Save As, and I'm going to create a new folder in my Complete Web Developer folder. So new folder, and I'm going to call it 5- Bootstrap. And the file I'll call bootstrap.html. There we go. Very quick challenge for you then. Can you update the URL here so that we're looking at the Bootstrap file rather than our old jQuery one? Go for it. All right, hope you got it. All you need to do is change for jQuery to 5-bootstrap, because that's the new folder. And then I called it bootstrap.html. And there we go. So you can see that already our hello world is nice and styled and looking good. Great, so we're all set up. But just before we dive any deeper into Bootstrap, let's just make sure we understand what's going on in this example file that we've downloaded. And I'm also going to change the layout a little bit to spread it out and get rid of any comments because they look a bit messy. Okay, so we're used to having our HTML tag with a language attribute. We've seen that before. And then we've got the header. Then we've got the character set, UTF-8. We've seen that before. And we've also seen the viewport meta tag. This is a new one though, the X UA compatible tag. Essentially, it's a specific tag for Internet Explorer, and it's used to control backward compatibility. So essentially, if we change this to content IE equals 8, then that would make every version of Internet Explorer after version 8 render the site using its Internet Explorer 8 compatibility mode. So this is just a way to be sure that your site will display correctly in future versions of Internet Explorer. Now we're designing our site when Internet Explorer Edge is the latest version. So this line is a kind of safety net that if the next version of Internet Explorer displays things or works in a different way to Edge, then our site will force it to use the Edge compatibility mode so that our site will display how we expect it to. So it's not a critical line there, but that's what it does. Right, then we've got our Bootstrap CSS. We don't need a comment there, I don't think. Notice this is being loaded from a CDN, Bootstrap CDN or Content Delivery Network. We saw this with jQuery and jQuery UI, and we also heard why it's generally a good idea. If you do want to download Bootstrap though and host it on your own website, you can do that. The option's right there in the download section. Just copy the CSS and JavaScript files and then reference them on your own site rather than using the CDN. But I'm going to leave this as is. The integrity attribute there just confirms that you are using the version of the file that you think you are. And the cross-origin attribute there just confirms that we're using this resource anonymously and not sending any credentials or login details to be able to use it. Note, of course, that if you're using a slightly different version of Bootstrap to me, you'll have a slightly different URL here, and that's fine. Okay. Closing the header and body tags we're used to. H1 we're familiar with, and then you can see we've got our jQuery script and our Bootstrap CDN or Content Delivery Network, Bootstrap.js beneath. It does have to be that way round because Bootstrap depends on jQuery. So if you try and put Bootstrap first, then a lot of the JavaScript aspects of Bootstrap won't work. All right, hope that makes sense. Now we've got Bootstrap up and running, we're going to be looking at a number of its features, but the first is the most important, and that is how it allows us to create responsive websites. It does that using grids. We're going to take a good look at the Bootstrap grid system in the next video. So how does responsive web design with Bootstrap work? Let's take a look. So back over at the Bootstrap docs, which are really good by the way, and I thoroughly recommend reading if you want more detail on anything that we're covering. Let's go over to layout. A quick look at the overview. So first off, Bootstrap has divs with classes of container. And they do what you might imagine, they contain the content within them. You can use container fluid to use a container which stretches the whole width of the user's screen. Now this bit here is where the magic really happens. Bootstrap uses something called media queries to have what are known as breakpoints. Now breakpoints are device widths below which the layout of the page changes. So if, for example, I take my screen and I make it narrower and narrower, nothing's really changing yet, but something did change there. Can you see? So we have a breakpoint at that point, which as we get narrower, increases the margin on the left and makes everything a little bit smaller. If we keep going, we should find another breakpoint. There it is. So that's changing the layout yet again. If we keep going, I think there's one more. There it is. So there's a jump just there. There it is. And I think that's the last one. Oh no, there's another one even there as well. And that's the thinnest breakpoint there. So there's a number of breakpoints, and the layout is then going to be different for screen sizes above or below those breakpoints. And that's actually quite easy to achieve in CSS using media queries. We have actually seen media queries before. You may remember them from our good old example.com where we started the HTML section. If we control or right click and view page source, there's a media query at the bottom of the style sheet, which I did mention, but we didn't go into any great detail on at the time. And essentially what this says is that this is a media query, and these styles will then be applied as long as the width is less than 700 pixels. And that's all a media query is. It's a set of styles that are applied at a certain width. And we can see the effect that that has on example domain. As I go narrower and narrower, at some point around here, I'll hit 700 pixels. And then you'll see the design flip. There we go. So that grey background only exists above 700 pixels. So you can see below 700 pixels, the background color is white, FFF, and we lose the border radius and padding and everything else. So example.com is very slightly responsive. You've got a kind of mobile version here and a desktop version here. We can do a bit better than that though. We don't just want to have two versions, we want to have several different versions. However, you're probably not keen on creating several different designs or layouts in your websites. That's where something like Bootstrap comes in really handy, because we can just have a single layout which then readjusts itself nicely each screen size using grids. So let's have a look and see what the Bootstrap website has to say about grids. So the grid system definitely isn't unique to Bootstrap. It's become an extremely popular way of setting up a responsive website. So I'm going to look at a very particular example first off, and then we'll see some more general examples. So here we've got 3 columns, and this is the code that creates them. So I'm actually going to copy this code and we'll look at it in our own bootstrap.html file. I think it'll be slightly clearer there. So we'll leave our hello world h1 in, and then we should really put hello world inside the container. Everything on a Bootstrap page would ideally be inside a container. So what we've got then is a div with a class of row, and then another div inside that with a class of col sm4. What on earth is going on there? Well, col is short for columns, sm is short for small, and 4 represents 4 columns. So the Bootstrap grid system is split into 12 little columns. So what we're essentially saying here is create a div that is 4 mini columns wide, and then another one that's 4 mini columns wide, and then another one that's 4 mini columns wide. So now, if we stretch that out full width, we get 3 nice columns, all nicely spread out. They're a third of the width of the whole page. As we bring things in though, you can see we're seeing those breakpoints already. The main breakpoint, however, is going to come in any moment now, and there it is. So you can see we've shifted from having 3 columns all the way across to having them stacked. And that's the key idea of grids, that the columns will arrange themselves differently depending on the width of the user's screen. And that's really the key idea of how grids work. There's a little more subtlety to it, as you might imagine, and I'll show you just a couple of extra features now. Firstly, you might be wondering what this SM really means. Obviously it's short for small, but what does that mean? Well, there are a number of different breakpoints that you can use within Bootstrap. And the small is the first breakpoint, so that's around here. But we've seen that there are breakpoints. There's one there, and there's one there as well. So if I want to use a larger breakpoint to be the point where this switches from horizontal to stacked, then I would just change that to MD, short for medium. And if we have a look at that now, so that will stack at the medium breakpoint. So it's getting smaller and smaller, and there we go, now it stacks. So the medium breakpoint is around there. So that can be really useful depending on how much content you want to have in each of these columns. To give you the details of what the various options are, so the small columns will stack at 576 pixels. So that's about this kind of width, the first example that we looked at. Then medium will stack at 720 pixels, which was the second example, and then large at 940 pixels, and extra large at 1140 pixels. Now, when you get really fancy, you can start mixing the small widths with medium and large to create really quite complex different layouts depending on screen size. If you're interested in that, then just have a look at some of these examples here. I think they're quite complex, so I'm not going to go into them in great detail right now, but we will be looking more at them later on. For now though, I'm just going to give you a quick challenge, and that is to create from scratch a 50-50 width layout. So 2 columns essentially, 50% of the screen each, which then collapse when my screen size is less than 720 pixels. Go for it. All right, hope you managed it. We start, as always with Bootstrap, with a container div. And then we use a row div to say that we're creating a row. And then our first column is going to have a class of col for column. Now we want this to collapse at 720, which is the container width associated with medium, so MD. So we're going to use column dash MD, and we want a 50-50 width. That means out of the 12 columns, each of our 2 halves is going to be 6 columns each. So we've got col for columns, MD because we want to switch at 720 pixels to a stacked view, and then 6 because we want this to be half the screen. And I'll just call it the first half. And then we're going to use exactly the same code for the second half. And that's it. Let's take a look then. So it's stacked there, which looks promising. Once we move to 720 pixels, which is around here, there we go. It switches to horizontal. Fantastic. So I hope that gives you a basic idea about how we use Bootstrap to create responsive websites. What we've got so far though doesn't look a lot like a website, and it definitely doesn't look that beautiful. So we're going to start looking at some of the Bootstrap components that can help us create a professional looking website in just minutes. And the first of those that we'll look at is the navbar. Now that we've mastered the Bootstrap grid system, we're going to take a look at some of the components within the Bootstrap CSS. And the first of those is navbars. So if you click on components, let's first have a quick look at these buttons, partly because they're quite nice and pretty, but mostly because they give us the standard color scheme of Bootstrap, which you can obviously mess with if you want, but it's a solid one to at least be aware of. So the names for these buttons follow on into almost every other Bootstrap component. So if you want something to be green, you give it a class of success. Similarly, if you want it light blue, info, orange, warning, danger, red, primary, blue, secondary, white, etc. You can see how that works here. You give it a class of btn to make it a button, and then btn-primary to make it a blue button. Similarly with success, info, warning, danger, etc. So we're going to be using that again and again when we want to change the color of things. But let's jump straight on the right menu here to Navbar. So you might be used to seeing something like this at the top of websites. Usually it's got a logo or something at the top left, maybe some links, maybe a search bar at the top right. Something like that has become pretty standard. And the Bootstrap Navbar enables us to set one of these up really easily. And it looks like that. So very pretty. Let's copy the code, have a look at it in our bootstrap.html file, and then see what's going on and how we can edit it any way we like. Okay, there we go. So there it is. In its basic form, it's obviously an attractive and clear navigation bar for your site, which could easily have a logo, some links, and a search box, and can be styled in any way. So let's have a quick look at the code and see what's going on. And this is the first time that we're really investigating the Bootstrap class system. So we'll spend a bit of time on that as we go through the code. So first off, we've actually got a new HTML element type here, and that is nav. This was new in HTML5, and it's essentially a div that's used for navigation. So it doesn't have any properties other than those that a div has, but it does tell the browser that in this section is going to be contained your navigation links for the website. But notice if you replace nav with div here, it doesn't change a thing. So really it's just a semantic thing that makes your HTML a little bit clearer. All right, now we've got our string of classes, and we'll see this again and again in Bootstrap, that you have a certain class to define what this component is. So in this case, a navbar. And then you have some customized classes which change the look or the behavior of that element. So here we've got navbar light and background faded. So feel free to experiment. If we get rid of background faded, then we have the same effect but with no background essentially. If we put that back in, we might want to change it to background success, and that will give us a green background. Could you make it a blue background? Wonder if you managed it. There were two options. Info is our light blue background, and primary is our darker blue background. There we go. Then we've got our first link, which has a particular class of navbar brand. So that means it will be considered the logo for the site, and usually that'll be an image, but in this case it's just some text. Next we have an unordered list with two classes, nav and navbar nav. Just set it up to look and behave like a navbar list of links. Then our first item has a special class of active. So it's a nav item, but it's active, which makes it a little bit darker. So that's for just the page that we're on. And then we've got the link itself, so an A element, and then that has a class of nav link, an href of just hash, so it means it will go back to the same page, and then text of home. Notice we've also got a span with a class of SR only. SR is short for screen reader. So if we want some text or information to be displayed only for we're using screen readers, that is devices for visually impaired people, then we can use that class and it will only display on those devices. Then we've just got a series of links, each of which have a class of nav item, and then the link itself has a class of nav link. So they form these ones. And then we've got a form. We'll be looking at those in more detail in the next video. And it's a form inline, which means that each of the input items are horizontally laid out rather than one above the other, and it's pulled to the right, and XS is one of our options for the screen size. And XS, if you remember, was essentially a 0, so this means it will be pulled to the right all the time. If I change that to MD for medium, then it will only be pulled to right for medium and above sized screens. And below that, it's just displaying normally. So normally you're going to want it pulled to the right all the time, and you achieve that with an XS. Then we've got our form itself. We'll look at that in more detail in the next video when we look at forms, but it's reasonably straightforward. What's going on, and then we end the form, and then we end the nav. So essentially, it's a really simple way of getting a nice looking navbar, which we can easily customize in terms of backgrounds, etc. But we don't have to worry about all the floating left, the styling, the spacing, and the fact that it's responsive for different screen sizes. So as well as the responsive grid system, the components are much of what makes Bootstrap so useful. Let's have a look at some of the other options of navbar. So navbar brand we've already seen. Nav we've already seen, that contains the nav items themselves. There are a few other color schemes here. We looked at the background, but you can also change the whole theme of the navbar itself. So we've got navbar dark at the top and navbar light. You can see they've set the background to inverse, which means that the text is white rather than dark. So it's easier to see on a darker background. Notice I didn't put my navbar in a container, because normally you want your navbar to stretch all the way to the end of the screen. But you can do if you want, but it'll look like that, which will be a little bit weird. We've then got some placement, and this one is really useful, the fixed top. So with just a single class, in this case navbar fixed top, you can make it so that your navbar will stay at the top of the screen even as the user scrolls down. So let's see that in action. That's really useful. So let's have a container, and then let's get a bunch of lorem ipsum. There we go, loads of the stuff. Lovely. So now when we look at that and we scroll down, you can see the navbar stays where it is. Can be annoying sometimes on certain websites. Use it carefully, but can also be very useful to keep the navigation right there for the user should they want it. Now the last thing I want to show you is quite fun. Let's say you wanted to have a button on your navbar which hid or showed some collapsible content, which maybe had some more navigation links or sign up to a newsletter or something like that. Then you could use this code. So let's just try it out and see what it does. So I'll put it under our existing navbar, and we'll just comment out the original navbar for the moment. So it's still there when you want to check the code. And there we go. Works really nicely. And let's see what code is doing this. We've got a div with a class of collapse. So that means we're going to collapse this div by default. So it's not showing by default. And it's got a particular ID, which we'll reference later. It's got a class of a background inverse, which means it's got this very dark background and pale text. It's also got a class of PA1, which is a special padding class. We can actually get rid of that and everything will still work fine. But PA1 essentially allows you to add a bit of padding in without doing that manually yourself. There we go. And then we've got our content with another special Bootstrap class of text muted to get that to display a certain way. If we have a look at that without that class, you can see it's muting the text essentially, giving it that sort of grayer color. Then we've got our navbar in the same way that we're used to, but now this is the clever bit. We're creating a button with a certain class of navbar toggler. It's got a type of button And it's got some new attributes that we haven't seen before, data toggle. And this essentially means that we're going to toggle the collapse class on the data target, which is the element with ID X collapsing navbar. So what we're essentially doing in the background here, there's some JavaScript connected up to all of this, which will find the button with a class of navbar dash toggler, and then it will look for the data toggle attribute, and then note that as collapse, and then it will look at the data target, and then it will find the element that matches that. So in this case, the ID of X collapsing navbar will toggle the collapse class. So this is the sort of thing that Bootstrap is really useful for. If you need to do something like that, and it's quite common that you might want to, you can do that really easily without having to create custom jQuery or JavaScript yourself. Great. So that's navbars. I'm just going to comment out the collapsible one now. So we'll save it in that form for you. So it looks like a more traditional navbar is there by default. One quick thing to note there is that as this navbar is now fixed, it's not in the flow of the page anymore. So we'd need to give the container a bit of padding or margin at the top to move everything down so that we'd see it. So I'll do it with some naughty inline styles just to show you how it might work. If we give it a margin top of 50 pixels, for example, there we go. Then that'll get it exactly on. Probably we want a bit more than that to bring it down a little bit, something like that. So I'd recommend doing that with fixed navbars. All right, so that's a new HTML element that we haven't met before, but Bootstrap does a huge amount for the ones that we're familiar with as well. And in the next video, we're going to look at two of those, and that is forms and tables. So moving on from navbars, forms and tables are two things that with plain HTML, it can take a lot of effort to make them look good. If we have a look at a basic form, I'm just going to get rid of all my navbar code. I might have something like email and then an input. I'm going to do very minimal code here, and then a submit button. Something like that, and I'm just going to take out Bootstrap for the moment. It doesn't look great. It does the job and the user knows what to do, hopefully, but it looks pretty 90s. Similarly with tables, if we put in a very quick table, then, in fact, I'll be very lazy and just put loads of robs in this time. It gets the alignment right, but other than that, it doesn't look like something you'd want to put on your web page. There are also two elements that are pretty difficult to make look nice responsively, that is, on a number of different screen sizes, from your huge desktop to your small user's phone. Fortunately though, Bootstrap has us covered. So let's see how we use Bootstrap to make nice, pretty forms and tables. So we'll go back over to the Bootstrap website. And under components here, I'm going to click on forms. And let's scroll down pretty quickly to get something that looks like a form. And there we go. You can see it looks a lot nicer than your standard form. And of course, because this is Bootstrap, it's responsive as well. So it will change behavior and look nice on a range of different screen sizes. So as before, rather than writing all the code out from scratch, I'm going to copy the Bootstrap code and we'll have a look through once we've got it up and running on our site, see how it works. So there we go. There's our lovely form. We should probably put it in a container. because we don't want it spread out right to the end of the screen like that. There we go. So then you get those nice borders and that responsive effect as well. So you can see the spacing's really nice. We've got a good bit of padding in the inputs there, and all the different elements are styled nicely. And we've got those nice pretty buttons that we saw earlier as well at the bottom. So let's have a look and see how we code it, because it is slightly different. Obviously this is still HTML, so we still have the form element at the beginning. We then have a field set, which is an element that we haven't seen before, but essentially it's a way of grouping together a number of form elements. Quite often it's only one, but you can put more than one in there if you want. You can see here most of the elements are inside a field set. So we've got our input there, and then our password input, and then our select, etc. So this has a class of form group, which gives it those styles. And then Bootstrap uses labels, which we have seen before, but we haven't used a great deal. They are a standard HTML element, and the advantage is that the label is then linked to the input itself. So you can style it relatively to that input. And you can see it's linked via the ID there. So we've got our label, then we've got our input. We're used to seeing the type and ID and placeholder, but we've got a class of form control. A form control is just a way of referring to any form element. So input there as well. Select would be a form control, text area, etc. So that's again what gives it the stylings. And worth noting as well, we've got a type of email here, which I don't think we've seen before. It's one of the HTML5 types, and it's very well supported by Bootstrap. So if you try and submit a form with an invalid email address, automatically a warning if the email address is not correct. And that's something that we don't need to program in at all, but it's something that Bootstrap does for us, which, as is the aim here, makes our life a lot easier. Then we've got some text with an element of small, which again we haven't seen before, but essentially it's just a paragraph tag, but with small text. And this has got the text muted class that we saw in the previous video, which makes it slightly faded as well. Okay, so that's our email address. We then close the filled set element and open up a new one for our password. And from here on out, everything's more or less the same. So the two classes that are critical here are the form group class and the form control class. So they give all the styles and the layouts. And the rest just follow a very similar structure, and we're used to seeing radio inputs, text areas, etc. All right, so a quick bit of practice then to get this into your head. So remember those two special classes that we needed. Can you create a simple form that asks for an email address and a password and has a submit button at the bottom? Go for it. Okay, hope you managed it. This is what I would do. I'll start with my container div. I didn't specifically say that you needed a container div, so don't worry if you didn't put one in. But with Bootstrap, unless you want something to specifically go right to the edge of the screen, then I'd recommend putting in a container div every time. Then we create our form. No special classes there. Tricky getting my tabs to line up, that'll do. Then we create a field set with a class of form group. So that's important class number 1. And then I'm going to create a label for my email address. I'll just call it email address. And I need to specify that this is for, and it's for the input that I'm just about to create, which I'll have an ID of email. And then we'll create an input with an ID of email. It's going to have a type of email as well. And it needs to have a class. And it needs to have a class of form control. There we go. I'm not going to do a placeholder or anything here. We'll keep it as simple as possible. Let's have a look. There we go. So we're looking good already. Then for our password, we'll create another field set with another class of form group. And then, just as before, label for, and this is going to have an ID of password. And we'll have an input with a type of password and an ID of password, and of course a class of form control. Great. And finally, we'll have another field set with a class of form group, and we'll have a button with a type of submit and a class of button, and we want a blue one, so button dash primary, and I'll just have the text of submit. All right, let's take a look. There we go. Fantastic. So I hope you managed to produce something similar. It is a good idea when you're learning these things to type it out for yourself at least once, so you've got it fairly clear in your head what the classes are and how it all fits together. Once you've done that though, there's no shame in going back to the Bootstrap site and copying and pasting direct from there. Okay, just before we move on to tables, let's have a little look at some of the alternative layouts and features of Bootstrap forms. So the standard layout is what we've seen here, the label above the input. But quite often you might want the label to the left of the input. And you can do that very simply just by adding the class form-inline to the form itself. So let's have a look and see how that changes things. So all we're doing is adding a single class of form-inline. And now the form looks like that. Essentially it's all in a single line. So that's great for, say, a small login form or maybe a search form at the top of your website. But quite often you won't want the whole thing to be in a line, but you will want the labels just to be to the left of the inputs themselves. So if we just scroll down a little, there's an option to do that. There we go. So this is my favorite layout because it's using the screen space well for a wide screen. But then if we go narrow enough, then it uses the vertical layout again. So very quick challenge again then. Can you apply this layout to the form that we've got here? Go for it. Hint, there's the HTML you're going to need. All right, hope you managed to do that. Notice we're going to remove the inline form class from form. And the way this whole thing works is we're putting columns around our labels and inputs. So just like we saw in the grids section previously, in the grids video previously, we've got a 2-column class on the label and then a 10-column class on the div which contains the input. So I'm going to add a row class to my field set. I'm going to experiment a little bit here. It should work fine with field set, even though they're using div here. Field set is essentially a div anyway. It just makes semantically clear that we're working with form fields rather than just generic content. So I'm going to add a class to my label of col for column small because we want this to switch into the stacked layout when we hit the phone screen size, which is SM, and then we'll give that one 2 columns. And then we want a div with a class of, again, columns, small, and then 10 columns, this one. There we go. So let's just have a quick look. Looks very good. So if we expand that, yep, that looks nice. And then when we get to a narrow enough point, it reverts to how it was before. Great. So very quickly, let's apply that to password as well. So I'm just going to copy and paste to keep things speedy. So we've got that class for the label. We're going to add a row class to the field set. And then we're going to add our div to surround the password input. Excellent. So with a big screen, it's going to look great like that. With a smaller screen, it compresses it a little, and then a very small screen, it goes stacked. Great. So that's more or less all I'm going to show you with forms. Feel free to have a look at the more layout options here. They're all pretty useful, and if you're making complex forms especially, then you'll be very grateful for things like inline checkboxes or radio buttons, removing labels, adding disabled states to inputs, read-only inputs, and one more I'll just show you, which is quite nice, is adding some info to the end of an input. Like here, I really like this layout. And you do that with the class input group add-on. If you put that before the input, then it will add some content before the actual interactive part of the input, and then you can add some at the end as well. So that's Bootstrap Forms. They're pretty, they're functional, and they're easy to use. Let's have a look now at Bootstrap Tables, which are all of that and more. So for tables, we'll go back to Bootstrap and Content, and then Tables. Remember, the layout of your Bootstrap site may be slightly different to mine, but you should be able to find tables quite easily. So we'll go through these a little bit quicker than we did the forms because you've got the idea now, but mostly you can see that these are a lot prettier than normal tables. So let's copy the code, and we'll see that there's not a great deal to change there. So I'll put it just above the form so we can have both there at once. And then let's have a look. There it is. So there's our nice pretty table. How are we doing that? It's actually very simple. We've got a table with a class of table. Pretty much all the work. If we remove that class, then the table just reverts back to a normal table, albeit with a prettier font than usual. You can see we've also got a scope attribute here. This is not actually a Bootstrap thing. It's a general HTML way of saying that this th, which remember is short for table header, is the header for this row. So you could also have a th with a scope of col for column, for example, but that is kind of considered the default. So essentially this doesn't make any difference at all. If we get rid of it, then everything will still look exactly the same. It just makes it clear that we're using th, but it's not a column header, it's a row header. The rest of the syntax though is exactly the same as the tables that we've looked at before. So let's jump straight to seeing what fancy things we can do with tables and Bootstrap. So we can make a nice inverse table, simply enough, by using the table inverse class. Let's have a little look. Notice that pattern again of having an initial class and then other classes which customize that first class type. There we go. So there's our inverse table. We can apply classes to the table head. Again, so thead inverse and thead default to show different backgrounds there. And we can apply those to table rows as well. One of my favorites is the table striped. So let's have a look at that one. There we go. So that just makes a long table especially a lot more readable than if every row is the same color. And then there are various other ones, so you can make it completely bordered, hoverable, like that, all with a single class. All of these things will be a lot of work to code if you were doing it separate from Twitter. Then they've got a small table, and we can apply our usual colorings to the rows and the cells as well. using active, success, info, warning, danger, etc. And of course, we can make our tables responsive as well. Alright, so now that we've fixed two of the very commonly used HTML elements, tables and forms, we're going to have a run through some of the coolest and most used. Alright, so we've seen how we can use Bootstrap to customize our forms and tables to make them look beautiful and make them a lot more fun to use. We're now going to whiz through a few of the components that Bootstrap provides you'll want to use in your websites because they look great and add a lot of functionality as well. So back on the Bootstrap website, click on Components, and then we've already got to buttons. We know how they work, so I'm going to move on to the excellently named Jumbotron, which is essentially a big rectangle that is designed to go at the top of the homepage of your site and be a real attention-grabbing thing. So you've probably seen this before. If you go to almost any big new startup websites such as uber.com, you'll see that they very commonly use some kind of big image, bit of text, and then a big call to action. So the idea of that really is that it funnels the user where they want them to go. So what does Uber want you to do when you go to their website? They want you to sign up. That's the big thing. So there's a nice big image there, simple bit of text, and then the call to action. And that's what the Jumbotron is for. So let's, again, copy the code and take a look at it on our own page. I'm going to get rid of the container for the moment because Jumbotron is one of those things that you probably want to stretch right to the edge of the screen. And there it is. So we've got no background image there, but that's pretty easy to add. But what we do have is a ready-made element to catch the user's attention and get them to do something with a button. The code is pretty simple. All we've got is a div with a class of Jumbotron. Just indent it nicely. We've got a custom class for the H1, which we don't really need. It just makes it a bigger, thinner text, as you can see there. So we can leave that in if you like. And then we've got a little bit of text, paragraph with a class of lead, so it's a bigger, more spaced out text than usual. Then we've got a horizontal rule, a normal paragraph, and then our call to action button. So nice and simple, but very useful just the same. Moving on from the Jumbotron, I'd like to show you alerts, which I've used in a number of sites. They're a great way of getting simple messages displayed to the user. And they look like this. So essentially, if the user's just filled in a form to send you an email or something like that, you might want to have this green one to show them a success, or a warning they didn't fill out one of the boxes, for example, or a red danger message if something actually went wrong. So let's copy the warning one over, and you can see that this is pretty straightforward. We've got our div with a class of alert and then alert warning to clarify that this is going to be the red one. We've got a semantic role is equal to alert. Again, if we remove that, it wouldn't make any difference, but it makes our HTML clearer. And then we've just got some content, which could be anything we liked in there. So there we go. There's our warning. We've also got a special alert link color, which just makes the link, if there is going to be one in your alert, fit in better the background and text color. And I really like this feature. You can just add an alert dismissible class to your alert, and you just need to add a button, which again we'll copy the code for and then see what's going on. And you add that inside your alert, and then we've got a button here with a type of button. A class is equal to close, which means that it will have some JavaScript attached to it so that it will close the alert that it's in when it's clicked. The thing that it's going to dismiss, i.e. the data dismiss, is the alert. And then we've got this thing called an ARIA label. Now, ARIA stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, which is another one of these things that makes your website easier to use for those with disabilities, which is yet another reason for using Bootstrap, because these things are built in. So if a user was using a screen reader, for example, or had accessibility options switched on in their browser, they may see a message called close there. And then we've got our ampersand times semicolon, which is our way of getting that X symbol, and an area hidden is equal to true means that the X won't be displayed if the user is on a screen reader, because they will see close instead. Okay, so let's just see that in action. There we go. So you can see the X now, and if I click that, it disappears. Wonderful. So that's alerts, which are really useful. You can also work with the JavaScript if you want to make them do something fancy, but we're not going to look at that right now. Okay, so there are two more components that I want to show you in this video, and the first is the progress component, which is a really handy way of showing the user's progress in something. So it's pretty straightforward. We use the progress HTML5 element, give it a class, give it a value, a maximum, and then some text if you want that will display. So let's have a look. So let's just change the value to, say, 35%. Oh, we might as well change this one as well. And there we go. So we've got a very simple progress bar, which you can update using JavaScript if you want, but it might just be a static way of showing how far they are through your sign-up process, for example, something like that. And we can add nice colors. So let's do that. Let's give our progress a class of progress success, and why not give it a striped effect as well, which of course we add using progress striped. Okay, let's take a look. There we go. Very nice. The last one then is a new component for Bootstrap 4, which is very flexible and has replaced a number of other components, and that is the card. So it'll be pretty clear what it is when you see it, something like this. So it's kind of an image and then a title and then some information and the call to action. So let's have a little look to see how that looks in our site. Let's just indent everything nicely. There we go. So we've got a full width one there. Of course, we don't actually have an image. So let's pop in a quick image from Wikipedia, just so we've got something to work with. We've had Homer and Marge. So let's have one of Bart Simpson. So we'll click on him. And then I'm just going to control click and copy image address, and then paste that straight into the src for our image. And then we just want a standard src, as we're used to here, a source. So you'll only use data src if you're doing something quite fancy with images. We're just loading one up, so it's just src that we use. Okay. So that looks pretty good, but it's obviously stretched out right to the edge of the screen. Often what you're going to want to use this for is if, for example, you want to show 3 features of your brilliant app, then you might want to have an image and then some information about that feature and then a call to action to do with that feature. And that's what these are generally designed for. So let's have a quick look, see how we do that. There's obviously some other content types that we can add to them. You can play around with those if you like. But I'm going to focus on layout here. So to change the layout, all we need to do is add some columns, as we've seen before. So we just add a class of row and then a class of col.sm, and then however many mini columns we want the width of that object to be. So here's a challenge for you. Can you make it so that there are 4 cards, each with the same content, going from left to right on the screen? Go for it. Okay, hope you managed that. All you needed was a div with a class of row to contain all of our divs. And then we're going to contain each of the cards in a div with a class of col for column, sm because we want this to stack when it gets onto a phone screen, and then we want 4 of them. 12 divided by 4 is 3, so they're going to be 3 columns each. There we go. And you can see that there's an extra class of card block here as well, which provides some nice styles. It'll work without it, but it just adds some nice spacing for the cards as they go from left to right. Okay, let's just get our indenting all nice. There we go. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. And let's then have a look. Wonderful. So we've got our 4 cards going along, and they will remain as they are until we hit the phone screen size, and then they will stack. So as always, cards have got a bunch of different options which you might want to check out if you're going to be using them in your site, various layouts, headers, footers, etc. But that's as far as we're going to go in this video. In the next video, we're going to look at Bootstrap modals, which is a more interactive feature of Bootstrap. And we'll use that as an opportunity to see how we can interact with the JavaScript of Bootstrap. The Bootstrap components that we looked at in the previous video were mostly about style, about how our various elements looked. In this video, we'll be looking at ones that are more about function, and we'll be doing a bit of jQuery as well to interact with those elements. And I'm going to start by looking at modals, which are essentially pop-up boxes to show your user some information or to allow them to do a particular action like send a tweet or something like that. So they're really useful, and again, you can use them without any JavaScript, but we can use some JavaScript if we want to do something a bit more fancy. So I've gone for the live demo option, which I want to run on my site. I don't want to spoil the surprise by trying it on the Bootstrap site. Let's see how it looks. So I've copied the whole code. I'm going to get rid of everything here and then paste that code in. So let's take a look and see what it does, and then we'll run through the code. So all we've got now is a button. Click that and our modal appears. So you can see it's got this nice kind of slide in from the top. It fades out the background. It makes the background unclickable as well, in that you can't interact with it, but if you do click on the background, it closes the modal, which is what the user would expect. And we've got 2 default buttons here, a close and that could be a send button or an OK button, depending on what the modal was doing. So hopefully you can imagine a huge number of uses for that. Let's have a quick look and see how the code works. So the button itself is pretty straightforward. It's just a button with classes to make it large and blue. But we're toggling the existence of a modal here. And the particular modal, the target that we're working with, has an ID of my modal. And that's it. That's all we need to give to the button. On the modal itself, we've got a div with a class of modal and then fade, because this is going to be a fading modal. You can see if we remove the fade class, it still appears just a little bit more quickly. So the fade kind of brings in a gradual slide from the top. We've got that ID there. This new attribute called tab index. This is used because a lot of people navigate through websites using the tab button, or particularly through forms, because the tab button can take you from one form input to the next. But we wouldn't want a user that was doing that to end up on our modal. We set the tab index to -1, and then anything on this modal won't be considered part of the tab flow as the user tabs through the content of the main page. The role of the modal is a dialog box. Dialog essentially is another word for modal, and then got some accessibility information as well. Then we've got another div within that, which has a class of modal dialog. This is the document. So this is a kind of container for the modal itself. Then we've got a container for the modal. Then we've got a container for the header part of the modal. A bit easier if we can see it there. So there it is. So the header has the X button on the right there, which we saw in the previous video when we were looking at alerts. So it's exactly the same as that. And then we've got an H4 with a particular class of modal title to fit in with the modal, an ID, and then the title itself. Then the modal body, so we could put anything in there, and then the modal footer, which generally will contain buttons to either do something or not do something, depending on what the user chooses. So hopefully you get the idea. That's how modals work. But I want to use modals as a quick example of how we can use jQuery to interact with a Bootstrap component, such as a modal. So if we go back and have a look at the Bootstrap page on modals, you can see we've got options and methods and events here. So you'll remember, hopefully, those from when we were looking at jQuery plugins, specifically jQuery UI. So options are things that we can add to our modal to make it display in a certain way. Methods are making the modal do something. So with methods, we can make the modal do something. So toggle its existence, for example, show or hide, or apply some options to it. And finally, events are things that happen when the modal is interacted with. So we might want to do something when the modal is shown, for example. And that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to imagine that we've got 3 buttons, which are all contact buttons, which send an email. So let's change our code from launch demo modal to email Rob. And then I'm going to have a second button, email Kirsten. And let's have a third button, email Tommy. Ralphie's too young to get email at this point. There we go. So each of these links to the same modal at the moment. And what we want to avoid doing is having 3 completely different modals for each of these, because they're all going to have very similar code. The only thing different is the email address. So let's see how we can work with the jQuery in Bootstrap to make that happen with just one modal code. So I've jumped through a lot of options there. You're very welcome to look at those in more detail if you like, but I'm more interested in the code at this point. So this is the main thing that we're going to be using. So we use a jQuery selector as usual to select our modal. And what we're looking at is we're looking at the event when the modal is shown. And this is called here show.bootstrap.modal. Then when that happens, we want to call a function, which is the code that we're going to add down here. And that function is going to have a variable called event, which, as we've seen before, contains a bit of information about what triggered the modal. So let's copy everything over and see if we can figure a way to integrate it with our code. So I'm going to put my jQuery code in its own script. Section, but make sure you do it after jQuery and Bootstrap, otherwise you may have problems. So let's get rid of these comments for the moment and indent everything nicely. So let's work our way through. This button variable we get from event, this variable here, .related target. So that gives us the button that was clicked. And then we can take from that button its data attributes. So for example, I might want to get the data name attribute. And then I could very neatly set a data-name attribute for each of these. So Rob, Kirsten, and Tommy. And then I would be able to access that down here. So for now, before I do anything too fancy, let's alert recipient. And we should find then that now, when we click on the button, as well as launching the modal, it does the alert, but of course it doesn't. Why is that? Aha, I think because I've kept it as example modal rather than my modal, which was the ID of the correct modal that we actually used. One of the dangers of copying and pasting, especially from two different sections. There we go. So now we've got our alert and our modal as well. Let's pop those back in. Then we're using this keyword that we've seen before, and it's the modal that we're working with here. So it's essentially my modal. So I could use that there as well, and it would work exactly the same. But this makes it a bit more flexible. If you update the ID here for some reason, you don't need to update it there as well. And then we're looking within the modal, and we're finding the class of modal title, and then we're changing that to have a text of new message to and then recipient. And then we're updating an input there, but we don't have that input, so I'm just going to get rid of that bit. So now, when we run it, we should find that we get new message to Rob, new message to Kirsten, and new message to Tommy. All right, so that's how we work with the JavaScript here. I'm going to give you a quick challenge. Can you do something similar so that when the modal is closed, you get an alert saying modal closed? So really simple. When the modal is closed, whichever one it is, you get an alert saying modal closed. Go for it. Did you manage it? You may have gone back to the Bootstrap page to have a look at the events. I think this one is going to be the one that we're interested in, but let's have a look at the events. So we've got hide Bootstrap modal. We could also use hidden Bootstrap modal, which happens when the hiding process is complete. So all we need is a string. We want to select my modal again. And we want to do something on hide.bootstrap modal. And the thing we want to do is a function. Again, it's going to have an event, even though we don't care about the details of that event. And whoops, I didn't mean to close my parentheses there. And all we want to do is when the modal is closed, alert modal closed. All right, let's check that in action. So new message to Tommy, great. Close that down. And of course it does nothing because I forgot my hash symbol. Just try that one more time. There's Tommy, close that down and modal closed. So notice that this popped up actually just before the modal was closed. If we wanted to have it just after, we'd change that to hidden.bootstrap.modal, and then we get the alert after the modal is closed. All right, so hopefully that gives you a bit of insight into how you can interact with these Bootstrap JavaScript components and make them behave the way you want them to. Let's just have a very quick look at a couple of the other cool JavaScript components. First one we'll look at is the popover, which is a way of displaying information next to or around another element. So I'll show you the live demo this time to speed things up a little bit. And it looks like that. Pretty cool. And you can get rid of it by clicking on the button again. So let's copy the whole lot there. And we'll add that in underneath our buttons. So let's just have a quick look at the code that does that. It's very simple. It's just a single button with a type of button and then classes for styling. But this time we're toggling a popover And the actual content of the popover is actually contained within data elements in the button itself. So we've got the title and we've got the content right there. Notice though that if we run this and click, nothing happens. Now that's for two reasons. Firstly, we need to include a third-party library to get popovers working. And we can see that up here. The popovers rely on the third-party library tether for positioning. So we have to include that file in order to make it work. So let's do that. Let's find a CDN or content delivery network for tether. There we go, cdnjs.com. Great. So all we need is the tether JavaScript, and we might as well go for the minified version. So I'm just going to copy that link, and then I'll insert it just before the Bootstrap code in the usual way. So script src equals, and then we want that whole link there, and then end the script. We don't need any integrity or cross-origin attributes this time. And of course, if you want to download the script instead, then you could just do that directly from there. And the advantage then would be it's stored on your site and you have more control over it. All right, there is one more thing we need to do though. Unlike modals, popovers are not enabled by default for performance reasons. So if we want to use them, we need to manually enable them using a code similar to this. So I'm going to pop this in to my JavaScript just there on the page, and this will select all of the items with a data toggle of popover, i.e. all the popovers, and then it will apply the popover function to them, which will make them popovers. So that was two fairly major steps that we needed to do for popovers that I wanted to show you. But now we should find that when we click popover, it displays. So there, I'd probably want to do popover underneath the button. So here's a quick challenge for you. Can you switch the popover so it's at the bottom of the button rather than on the right? Did you manage it? It's just a matter of looking at the relative code. So we've got popover on top, right, and then underneath that one, bottom. So we're going to want the third one along. Let's have a look. What's the code? Data placement bottom. That looks very relevant for us. So let's just add that in. Could go anywhere in our button code. And then run that again. And now the popovers at the bottom. Fantastic. So the last thing I want to show you then is tooltips. And these are very similar to popovers, but popovers tend to stay there until you manually dismiss them by clicking the button, whereas tooltips just appear on hover. So back on Bootstrap again then, let's have a very quick look at tooltips. And again, for time, I'll show you how they work on the site. And notice that we're going to need to enable them again. They require tether as well, but that's okay because we've already got tether set up. So let's add our code for that there. And then let's go for a tooltip on the bottom. For the same reason, I'll pop over on the bottom. So now we should be able to get that working. There we go. So the tooltips appear on hover and disappear when you move out of the button. So a very quick final challenge then to see if you've got the hang of interacting with these things. Can you create an alert which displays as soon as the tooltip itself displays? Go for it. All right, hope you pulled that off. To do something when something else happens, we're definitely looking at an event here. Okay, and we've got show, shown, hide, and hidden. We're definitely going to want either show or shown, depending on whether you want it just before the the tooltip displays or just after. I'm going to go for shown, I think. And we can see that it's a very similar syntax to what we used for the modal. So let's type it out ourselves because I think we can. Let's check out to see if our tooltip has an ID. No, it doesn't. So we could select it using this, but I want to be a bit more specific, so I'm going to give it an ID. And my tooltip seems sensible. There we go. And then we just select it in the usual way, so with a hash for ID and then my tooltip. And we want to do something on, i.e. when, a certain event happens, and the event that we're after is not hidden, it's shown.bootstrap.tooltip. And we want that to happen, or we want a certain function to happen when that's done, and the function that we want is alert tooltip displayed. Okay, close the parenthesis, and there we go, that should do it. Let's have a look. Wonderful, tooltip displayed. Brilliant. So I hope that's given you a bit of an idea how we interact with these components in a bit more detail using jQuery. In the next video, which is the final one before our big Bootstrap challenge, I'm going to get you to attempt to figure out how the Scroll Spy plugin works and create a working version in your bootstrap.html. All right, so now we've looked at modals, popovers, and tooltips. I'm going to challenge you to complete the setup of a reasonably complicated Bootstrap component, and that is Scroll Spy. So the object of this challenge is for you to put together everything that we've learned in the last few videos and find the information on the component, work out first off what it does, and then recreate that in your own HTML page. As always, if you have any problems, I'll go through the process after the pause. So good luck. Just got to find the information about Scroll Spy on the Bootstrap website and set it up in your bootstrap.html webpage. Good luck. All right. Did you manage it? I hope so. I'm going to get the information from here. So let's first off try and figure out what on earth Scroll Spy does. Generally speaking, an example is the best thing for it. The Scroll Spy plugin is automatically updating nav targets based on the scroll position. Okay, so if we scroll down this window, aha, you can see that it's moving along the nav bar at the top. Great. Okay, so hopefully that's something that you can see would be quite useful. One of the reasons that I chose the Scroll Spy plugin for you to attempt is that at the time of writing, there's no copy and paste code on the Bootstrap site. That may well be different for you, and if you were able to copy and paste it and get it working, absolutely fine. But we're going to try and figure it out how it works without just copying and pasting an example. Obviously, worth mentioning that we could view the page source and find the code and probably copy and paste that. But we'll attempt to do it another way just to show you how we could do it. So trying to figure out how on earth this plugin works. So we can see we're going to need a nav at the top, and then we're going to need some content, and somehow we need a way of connecting up the nav and the content. So let's start by putting a nav in. So we've got a link there to the Bootstrap nav component. Here we go. I think this inline one will do fine for us. So let's get rid of this script code because we don't need any of that. And also we don't need tether anymore either. And get rid of all of our code there. So let's put the nav in first off and just check that that's displaying correctly. There we go. Fine. And then let's go back and see how we're going to connect this up. So first off, we need to apply relative positioning to our body tag. So let's do that. So I'll do that with a inline style, or internal, sorry, style command. There we go. And then we apply the data spy and data target elements to our body tag. So that makes sense. We're setting up the body tag to be the thing that is spied on as we're scrolling, and we're setting up the navbar example div to be the thing that gets updated when the user is scrolling. So let's add an ID here to our nav. We might as well use the same one. And it looks to me like we'll need a UL with those classes, nav and nav tabs, with a role of tab list. So let's set up our links as LIs. There we go, and we'll just close those LIs after the links. Alright, we'll just have a look, make sure it still looks like a nav. Oh yep, great, we've lost our inline, but that's okay. And I think I'll get rid of the disabled one as well. Okay, so the question I'm wondering is how we connect up each of these links to its respective point on the page. Now this is looking like the answer. Navbar links must have resolvable ID targets. So we need a link that goes to an ID on the page, and then we need a div with that ID on the page. Okay, so that makes sense. I'll just put the names of the sections in. So I'll just go for 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then we'll have an H2 with an ID of 1, which will contain section 1, and then we'll have a div, and we'll get some good old Lorem Ipsum text in there to fill out our page. Lovely. And then we'll do the same for sections 2, 3, and 4, and then just go back and rename those. Section 3, 2, and one's already there. And one thing to note is that we will need the nav to be fixed. So I'm going to just change that to a nav bar with a default styling, and we'll make it fixed to the top. All right, fingers crossed. Let's have a look. All right, so it doesn't look great, but that's okay. Let's scroll down and see if we get the effect. There it is. So it is indeed updating. Our scroll spy is working. We could definitely do with a little bit of tidying up here though. So first off, let's give this a background so that it's not transparent, which is a bit confusing. And let's add the nav item class to our list, which should make everything go horizontal rather than vertical. Not that it really matters, but it's a little bit nicer as an example to work with that. Great, so you can see what our navbar tabs is doing there. It's styling it like tabs. All right, so we're pretty much done. I do want to just add a bit of a margin there to my section 1 so that it's not hidden behind the navigation. So let's just add a margin top of, let's try 70 pixels. There we go. That looks a lot better. And there is one final issue. If you see where it updates, in fact, to make it slightly clearer, I'll just change these to the correct numbers. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So section 2 is coming along, and it only changes when section 2 gets right to the top of the page, which is not necessarily what you want. It also, for us, causes a problem here because it never quite gets to section 4, because section 4 is almost at the top of the page, but not quite. But there's a nice easy way around that, and we can actually see it on the Scroll Spy Bootstrap page, that we have this data offset attribute that we can add, which is pixels to offset from the top when calculating position of scroll. So as we've just added a margin top of 70, let's add a data offset value of 70 as well. And we should find that this will give us a more sensible point of switching from one to the other. So let's have a look. So it's now switching to section 2 just there, which is great. That's when section 2 is at the top of the visible part of the screen, and then section 3 and section 4 as well. And of course we can click on the links to jump to the respective parts of the page as well. Alright, so I hope you managed that. In the next and final video of this section then, we'll be using everything that we've learned in the Bootstrap section of this course to put together a beautiful... So congratulations on making it to the end of the Bootstrap section of the Complete Web Developer course. You've been introduced to Bootstrap as an HTML, CSS, and JavaScript framework. You've seen how easy it makes creating great-looking responsive websites, and we've used a number of the components to see how they work and how easy it is to incorporate them into your sites that you're going to be developing. Now it's time to put all of that together in our Bootstrap challenge, where we'll be making an app marketing page. So let me show you what we're going to be aiming towards. It's something like this. So it's pretty straightforward really, but it looks nice and has really clear call to actions. So I've pretended that we're working on an app called My App, and we've got a nice nav bar across the top, which should be pretty straightforward. I've then given a background image to our Jumbotron. Now where you get that background is up to you, but if you do a quick Google of free high-res photos, there are a number of pages out there that offer these. I'd ignore the ads at the top. And the one I normally use is called unsplash.com. But you can see there are a number of others out there. Feel free to try them out. And there's even a few sites listing free stock photo sites. So I definitely recommend checking those out if you need some stock photography. But I'm going to be taking mine from unsplash.com, which has got a number of really nice high quality photos which you can use absolutely free. Okay. So that's where you get your background image from. We've then got a nice email sign-up form there. And we're using some cards to display some more information about the app. Notice I've also got some really nice icons in here. I've just chosen some random ones, but I've done that with Font Awesome. You might want to jot that down. It's really easy to use, so I'd recommend doing that as part of the challenge, figuring out how to get icons from Font Awesome into your site. But of course, I'll show you when I go through it if you have any problems. And then finally, we've got a nice big download button, which of course doesn't go anywhere, but it's somewhere for the user to click to get your app. And you'll notice we're all connected up with Scroll Spy here, so as we scroll back up again, the links update automatically. So that's all you've got to do. Easy, right? Well, as always, thoroughly recommend doing as much as you can on your own, and then watching how I get it done. Good luck. All right, so I'm going to start by clearing out my code here. So we start off with a nice clean file. So everything goes out of the body. And we're left with just that. And then I'm just going to switch over to bootstrap.html. There we go. All right, then, here we go. I'm going to start by going to the Bootstrap documentation. And I'm going to get that by Googling Bootstrap 4. And here we go. I'm going to start with the navbar at the top of the screen. As usual, I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. So let's jump over to the documentation and components and navbar. And as you saw, we're heading for a fairly standard navbar, so that top one should do the job pretty much in its current form. So let's copy and paste the code there. And remember, we don't need a container because we want this to go all the way to the edges of the screen. Excellent. So that's looking pretty good as is. Obviously, we need to update it with some information about our imaginary app. So I'm going to change the navbar brand, that is the logo, to just be the basic My App. And then I'll keep home as it is. I'll replace features with about, where we're going to have some information about the app. And then I'll just have a third and final section, download the app. There we go. Let's just check, make sure that's all looking okay. And there we go. Excellent. As I mentioned, we're going to have a login section here. Not that that's actually going to work because we don't have any server-side languages yet, although we will have quite soon when we look at PHP in a couple of sections time. But for now, we'll just have an email and password option. So let's change that first one there to have a type of email. And we'll replace the placeholder with email. Then I'll just copy and paste that for the password. And we'll replace the placeholder with password. And then we don't want a search button, we want a login button. And I'm going to get rid of the outline here for no particular reason other than I think it looks a little better filled in, but you're welcome to keep it like that if you like. Notice that the placeholder is displayed, but when we start typing, of course, the password characters are hidden. Excellent. So far, so good. Now let's move down to our Jumbotron, which is still a word that I love saying. Here we go. So let's start off with the demo code and work from there. Great, so that looks pretty good as is, but we want, of course, a nice big image to make that look even classier. And to find one, I'm going to go to unsplash.com and let's just have a look down, see what would work well. We want one with a lot of space, really. That one looks pretty good, but we'll keep on looking. I'm liking that one. That top part there would be a nice non-intrusive background. So I'm going to go for that. Of course, you're very welcome to try another one. So I'm going to click on the image and there it is, and then download. And there it is. Now I should be able to save image as. And I'm just going to pop it there on the desktop for now because I'm going to do a little bit of editing with it. So I'm going to open it up in preview. You can do the same thing in Windows if you open up the image in Windows Photo Gallery, which does more or less the same thing. And then I'm just going to select the bit that I want. So it's something like that. And then Tools and Crop. And that then saves the part of the image that I've selected. Again, if you're on Windows in Photo Gallery, you can do that in the Fix menu. And then I'm also going to have a look at the size because we don't want it to be too big. No, I think that's about right. It still may be quite large, 0.5 megabyte or so. I'd probably make it smaller for a production site, but I'll leave it as is for now. And then we can export. And I'll save it in Complete Web Developer Course and Bootstrap. And I'll just call it background. There we go. And I don't need to save the original. Great. So back to our Jumbotron. Let's add some styles to set the background image. So we're working with the class of Jumbotron. There's only going to be one. And we want to set the background image to have a URL of background.jpg. All right, let's have a look. Beautiful. A little bit generic, perhaps. It doesn't say a great deal about what our app is doing, but given that we don't actually have an app, that's fine. Obviously, you'd want to choose an image which is just as pretty, but is a little bit more specific so that people look at that and they can see straight away what your app is about. Excellent. Let's just update the text there to have something fairly generic about apps. So we'll call it My Awesome App. And here at the top then is you want a simple, compelling reason why someone should download the app. So this is why you should download this fantastic app. So effective landing pages convey a simple amount of information very, very quickly. When people are browsing the web, they're not going to spend ages reading your site. They're going to decide usually within just a few seconds as to whether they're interested or not. And you need to grab their attention really quickly, get the key feature of the app and make it clear that they need to download it right now. All right, then we're going to add the code for the mailing list. So underneath there we'll have something like want to know more. Join our mailing list. And you might even want to offer a freebie or something for your mailing list. People really like to get something for free, such as a mini course or some information, or even a demo version of the app, something like that. But it's always good to offer a great incentive to join your mailing list. All right, then we're going to need our form for the user to sign up to the mailing list. So let's jump over to Forms on the Bootstrap site. And I'm going to take the opportunity to use one of the ones that have a fancy add-on at the beginning there, just because I think they look good and we didn't explicitly try one ourselves when we saw them in the Forms video earlier on. So under there, let's add in our form. Let's leave it as a form in line for the moment and see how it looks. And then this label is not going to be, for example, amount anymore. It's going to be for email. And we'll change that to email address. Remember, this is screen reader only, so we're not going to be able to see this on our browser, but it'll be great for accessibility. And then I'm going to use the @ symbol to denote that this is an email address. And it's not a currency, so I'm going to get rid of the 00 at the end. And then we're going to make this a type of email. Class is still form control. ID is email. And I'll have a placeholder of your email. And then we'll change the button to sign up. And then we can get rid of the old button there. Let's take a look. Great. I think that looks pretty good. I especially like the blue on top of the blue of the background there. A couple of minor aesthetic issues. I think the email input there is a little bit short. I'd like to make that a little bit longer. And I think I'm going to center everything here. Just personal preference, but it's pretty easy to do. We just go up to our Jumbotron styles and add text align center. And we've got an ID for our email input already. So let's just give that a little bit of extra width Let's try 300. See how that looks. Great. Excellent. So looking good. Let's just see. You can see it displays really nicely at a bunch of widths and even at a really narrow width. Like that. So now we're going to work our way down. So we're going to have another nice big headline here. But actually my code's looking a bit nasty, so I'm just going to do a quick bit of indenting to tidy that up. So I just selected it all and pressed Tab. And that already looks quite a bit better. There we go. So after our Jumbotron, we'll have a div with a class of container. And then within that, we'll have a div with a class of row. We're not going to have any fancy columns or anything here because we just want some simple content. But because we're using Bootstrap, it's good to use the default classes. Generally, it'll make your layout better if you do that. So let's attempt an H1, see how that looks. And once again, you really need to press home why your app is so awesome. And then we want some quite big text here. We saw before the class is lead. So let's try that here. So we're going to have summary once again of your app's awesomeness. Okay, I think that looks good, but I do want everything centered here. So let's give this class a quick ID of app summary, like that. And then we'll add a text align of center, which will make everything nice and centered for us. All right, in the next one, next row that is, we're going to have our 3 cards. Remember, that's the cool new Bootstrap 4 feature that replaces panels and a bunch of other stuff as well. So let's click on cards and see which suits us the best. I think that first one should suit us absolutely fine. We will need another image, but we can get one of those. It's not a problem. So let's copy that over. In fact, let's just remind ourselves how we get the deck of cards, as it's known. One after the other. It's down here somewhere. And groups is not quite what we want because we don't want them too close together. We want a deck, just like this. Great. Remember, the really nice thing about this is the cards will all be the same height, even if the text length in each of them is different. And that's almost always what you want when you're doing something like this. So let's copy that over. And we'll put it. Does it come with a container? No, but I don't think we'll need one actually, because it has a card deck wrapper. So let's just have a quick look before we add our image. Great. That is going a little too wide, I think. So I will add a container class to that because we don't really want it going all the way to the edge. Nice. That looks just a little bit better. So now to find our little image that we're going to use, we'll go back to unsplash.com. And so we just want a fairly small one this time. So let's see if we can find, oh, that'd be quite cute. I like the look of that one. We want one that's just a little bit wider. So if we crop just there, I think that'll look great. I may be biased having a 5-year-old son, but I think there's something nice about that picture. Okay, so once again, I'm going to right click or control click and save image as. save it on the desktop, then go back over to the desktop, open it up in preview, and I'm just going to crop it to roughly the right dimensions. So just something a little bit wider than it is high. Let's try and get the boy's arm in. There we go. And then Tools, Crop. I don't quite like that crop. I'm going to undo and get a little bit more sky in. Let's try that. Great. So then we'll export that into Bootstrap, and I'll call it Father and Son. And we don't need to save the original. Okay, so let's change, remember, data src to src, and we'll just copy that up to all of these. Of course, you'd normally have different images for each of these, and they would be images that would have something to do with your app rather than just one that you thought was charming. Okay, so that's pretty good, but a little bit larger than we'd want, I think. So let's specify a width. Remember, Bootstrap is expecting 241 or 242 in terms of the width. So let's set card image top to have a width of 242 pixels. Okay. We're not quite there. So we've got the right width. Of course, the cards themselves change their width. So we're going to need to make the image actually the width of the card. And we should be able to do that by just changing the width to 100%. And then it will make it 100% the width of the container, which is the card itself. That's better. Great, so doesn't tell you a great deal about the app, but it's a nice image. Okay, I did mention I was going to put in some icons here using Font Awesome. So I hope you've managed to figure out how to do something similar yourself, but let's see how we would do it. So we'll have a quick Google for Font Awesome. There we go. And it's just got some really nice icons in there. So let's see how we would get started. Get started looks like a good option for us. And then, we've got a fantastic CDN link. So let's go for that. Nice and easy. Of course, you can always download the CSS and host it yourself if you prefer. So let's pop that up there. Great. And then let's see if it's got a basic instruction as to how we add an icon. Let's have a look at the icons themselves. Here they are. So I've got a huge number of icons. I'm going to start with an anchor one because we seem to be at the seaside here. And you can see there we've got the HTML code for putting the anchor in. So let's try that out on our first one. Just at the beginning of the card title there. Wonderful. Let's just pick another couple while we're here. Bicycle looks nice. So I'm going to copy that one. And that's just going to go there. I'm also going to have a space to space that out a little bit. And then a birthday cake. Why not? Not quite sure what features these could possibly represent, but you get the idea. And I'm actually going to get rid of the last updated part at the bottom because that's not really relevant for us. Okay. Excellent. So I'm not even going to edit this text down here. The important thing to notice is that the cards all have the same height, even though they have a different amount of text in them. Great. I'm feeling a little bit more padding is needed for this part here, the why the app is so awesome. So let's just add that in. We've already got a CSS selector for it. It's app summary. So let's add a bit of a margin top, maybe 100 pixels. And let's try a margin bottom of 100 pixels as well. Great, little too much. So let's try 40 at the top and 50 at the bottom. Seems to be slightly nearer the top anyway. And a little bit more at the top, I think. Great. All right, so we're nearly there. All we're going to add now is essentially a footer row, which will contain the link to download the app. So let's start here. We'll have a container div. And a row div. And we'll have an h2 for download the app, and a final, as if the user wasn't completely convinced that they should. Really, why should I download this app? And then we'll have a link to the App Store. So I'll look on Google Images to get the App Store link, or App Store image, I mean. Here we go. That first one looks pretty perfect. I don't quite like the shininess. I think I'm going to go for the second one. When you're looking at these, it's worth checking out the size. So 901 by 312 is a little large, but it should be okay for us. But another more important thing to be aware of is whether they have transparent backgrounds. And you might not be able to see this on my screen here, but if you look really close, you might just be able to see a square there, a lighter, slightly darker, and then another lighter square. And that indicates that there is indeed a transparent background here. So it'll look good regardless of what color our background is. So let's download that. So we'll save image as. I just control click there. Right clicking would do it as well. And App Store icon is a pretty good name for the image, so we'll leave it at that. So you might want to resize it and make it a little bit smaller. That's up to you, but I'll leave it as is for now. And then here, I'll put it in its own paragraph tag. This is going to be a link, but I'll just leave the href blank because we haven't actually got an App Store page. And then we'll have our image. And you can see there it is, App Store icon. All right, that's probably going to be pretty wide, but let's just have a look. See how it comes out. Okay, great. It's a little bit too large for us. So let's make a few changes here. So first off, we'll give this an ID of App Store icon, and then we'll set the width to, let's try out 200 pixels. And while we're here, I'm going to give our container an ID of footer. And I wanted to have a background. So we'll give it a background color, and let's try aqua. We seem to be developing a water theme here. And a padding at the top of, let's try 50 pixels, and also a margin at the top to separate it from the cards above of, again, let's try 50 pixels. And I want to center everything. So let's try applying that too. Brilliant. So this definitely looks a lot better. You can see that there's no extra white on the corners there, so this is a nice transparent image. The major issue is that our background is not going right to the edge of the screen, and that's because we've got it set up as a container. I think probably the easiest fix, which should work fine for us, is just to remove the container class there, which is actually fine for us. So that's now full width. The only thing I'm not happy with is we need a bit of padding at the bottom. So let's add in a padding bottom of, again, 50 pixels seems to be working out well for us. So let's try that. Excellent. Okay, so you can obviously play around with the styles there, but there's only one more thing that I'm going to do, and that is set up these links with Scroll Spy so that we can link to different parts of the page and that it will update automatically as we scroll as well. So first off, let's set the links up. So we'll give our Jumbotron an ID of Jumbotron, and we'll set up that link. Oh, not there, sorry. Just there will take us to the top of the screen, and then about, we want that to take us to the card deck wrapper. So we'll call this about, and then link there, and then we want that one to link to the footer. So let's just have a quick look, check that our links work. About, yep, wonderful. And download the app is at the bottom there. Great. So let's just set up Scroll Spy. You remember that we need to add data spy is equal to scroll to the body, and then the data target, and that's the nav. So we could use anything here, but I think it makes sense to give this an ID of navbar, and then we can set up that data target there. All right. We also need to add a position is relative to the body for this to work. And of course, we'll need our navbar to be fixed to be able to actually see it when we scroll down. So we'll add a navbar fixed top class to that. So that's going to cause an issue with our Jumbotron, but that's easily fixed. There we go. So you can see that that did update for about, but not for download the app because it's not tall enough to get to the top of the screen. So I'm going to change a couple of things there. First off, I'm going to change the data offset to be pretty high. So let's try 150 pixels to see how that looks. And I'll also add an extra 100 pixels to the top and the bottom. Sorry, the padding rather than the margin. And let's have another look. So now we do get to download the app. That's just on my screen size, so it's not critical, but it's a little bit better. Now you can see home is highlighted all the time there, which is not what we want. So let's get rid of the active class on home. And then it should be active anyway at the top, but then it will switch to the active div. Brilliant. So finally, all we need to do is just move the Jumbotron down. We can do that by giving it a margin top of, I'd say, about 50 pixels. Wonderful. So we've got our navbar working well with our login. And as we scroll down, Scroll Spy kicks in. There we go. We've got our cards with their nice icons. And we've got our download link at the bottom. And of course, it's all brilliantly responsive. As we get narrower and narrower, everything still looks great. Wonderful. So I hope you enjoyed making that, and I hope you're inspired to make some landing pages of your own. We're not quite done with Bootstrap though, because one of the many great bonuses you get with this course is a collection of 3 great Bootstrap themes, which are the official themes from the makers of Bootstrap themselves. So in the next video, I'm going to show you the basics of these themes and how you can start editing them to make fantastic looking dashboards, marketing websites, and so one of the many fantastic extras you get with the Complete Web Developer course is the complete set of official Bootstrap themes. You can check these out at themes.getbootstrap.com. They usually cost $99 each. You can download all 3 of them for free with this course and use them as many times as you like. So in this video, I'm just going to show you how to get hold of them and how to make very basic edits so that you can start building your own sites with them. The first theme is a dashboard theme, so the sort of thing you might see when you're logged into a web app of some kind that shows the user some stats about their website or whatever it is the app is doing for them. So there's some really cool stuff in there. And of course, it all uses Bootstrap, so it's super editable and you can add any of the features that we've seen in this section very easily to it. The second one is a marketing website, so a little bit similar to the one that we created in the previous video, but I think it looks quite a bit better. To be fair, it's been designed by the makers of Bootstrap themselves, so it's pretty good. And finally, the last one is a kind of social media application theme. So if you're wanting to build the next Facebook or Twitter itself, then this would be a great start. So how do you get them? Well, once you've signed up to Eco Web Hosting and verified your purchase of the course, then you just go to ecowebhosting.co.uk/cp/profile. If you haven't signed up to Eco Web Hosting yet, then follow the instructions to do that in the video at the beginning of the course. Then just scroll all the way down, and right at the bottom, you'll see the 3 official Bootstrap themes worth $297. So they are downloadable from here. So all you need to do is click the Here link, and that will then open up a download box, which you just save directly to your computer. Incidentally, the themes are regularly updated, and I'll put the latest version, whatever it is, here. So if you're making a site in a few years' time with these Bootstrap themes, you might want to come back and download the latest version. All right, when that's downloaded, just go over to Finder or Windows Explorer and find the file. There it is, bootstrapthemes.zip, and then double click it to unzip it. And in there, you'll see all 3 themes. Here we go. So we'll have a quick look at the application one first. And you can see we've got a number of folders there, but the one we're really interested in is the docs folder. And then we're going to open up index.html in Chrome. And there you can see the website exactly as it looks in the picture on themes.getbootstrap.com. So it's obviously all completely interactive. You can start typing in the search boxes. In fact, if you click in the search box, it expands quite fancily like that. If you click out, it gets smaller again. And of course, being Bootstrap, it's completely responsive. So it changes its design. And you even get this drop-down menu effect when you get into the phone screen size. To edit it then, it's pretty straightforward. You just open up that index.html file in your text editor of choice, and you can see it's got a couple of its own CSS files, and then all the content is right here as you would expect. So if you wanted to change, it might be time to visit Iceland link, then you can do that. I would use Command F or Control F to find it. And there it is. I'll just put it might not be time to visit Iceland. And there we go, it updates, obviously straight away. So it's pretty simple. It's a great looking theme that you could use for a huge range of applications. Let's have a little look at the other two. So the dashboard, once again, we're going to look in Docs, and we're going to open up index.html in Chrome, and there it is. So we've got the date picker built in, we've got some stats, some nicely customized progress bars there, and some neatly styled buttons, hovers, etc. You can even, with this one, customize the circle there to whatever you want it to be. It's not an image. So if we open it up in our text editor and look for new versus returning, there you go. You can see it's a donut chart. So if we changed this to 30, for example, and the other one to 130, or leave it as it is, then that will update automatically. And even these graph curves here are not images. We can customize those as well. So if we have a look for page views, there we go. You can see that this is being created by a canvas, which is an HTML5 element that we haven't seen yet, but we will look at in the HTML5 section towards the end of the course. And essentially it allows you to draw anything on your page, including a graph. So if, for example, I crank up that first result to a 90, then we should see the beginning of this line. There you go, increase right there. So once again, great looking theme, really powerful. And if you want to make a nice looking dashboard for your web app, it's a great place to start. Finally then, let's have a look at the third theme included. This is the marketing theme. So once again, we'll look in the docs folder, and then we'll open index.html in Chrome. And here we go. So this is actually 4 themes in one. So we'll start with the startup theme. Again, this is created using code, although the camera is an image, but that's fair enough. And then we've got a really nicely laid out iPhone screenshot there. It'd be very easy to change that with a screenshot of your app. Some more information about whatever the product is. Customer quotes, logos of customers, and really nice images, pricing setups, and a nice footer with links to the rest of the pages on your site. So I think that looks great. The minimal theme has got similar content, but a different layout. But once again, looks great. We've even got a slider here, so we can show a number of different chunks of content. And then we've got the bold theme, which is a completely different style if you're going for a kind of music website or something a little bit cooler. All right, so I hope your brain is whizzing with great ways that you could use those themes, and I hope you enjoy them. They're a great benefit, which you can only get with the Complete Web Developer course. So that takes us to the very end of our Bootstrap section. We're now going to look at another way of creating and managing websites using a system that actually powers 25% of the web, and that is WordPress.